back, everyone, to Real Solutions, a podcast series on policies for a future where everyone belongs. The Othering and Belonging Institute is hosting this podcast series with leaders from across the country to uplift and insist on bold policy solutions that would move the country towards belonging and well being for all people.
The influence of wealthy individuals and corporations over elections has distorted our democracy away from the will of everyday people. Today, we're going to talk about public finance of election campaigns, which provide support for candidates to run for office, even if they're not favored by wealthy political interests. This policy helps level the playing field and increase access to candidates who come from low-income backgrounds and have agendas that hold powerful interests accountable.
And today we are joined by Council Member Alexa Avilés, who is currently serving in her second term on the New York City Council representing the 38th District. She is a proud Boricua Brooklynite dedicated to public service and ensuring that all people have what they need to thrive. Council Member Avilés serves as the chair of the Committee on Immigration and sits on several other important oversight committees. Before her election to the City Council, Alexa's career spanned almost 3 decades in the not-for-profit and social justice philanthropic sectors.
And we're also joined by Cindy Black, who's been the executive director of Fix Democracy First since 2016. She was also the campaign director for the successful statewide 2016 ballot initiative that made Washington the 18th state to call for a U.S. constitutional amendment to end court decisions like Citizens United. She's active with several state and national coalitions, focusing on protecting voting access, expanding public funding of elections, campaign finance reform, ranked choice voting and proportional representation, and increasing civic participation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Real Solutions podcast, where we talk about real problems and the real solutions to address those problems so we can all build a world where everyone belongs. My name is Jose Richard Aviles. I am one of your hosts, and today we're going to be talking about public financing. Eli, how are you doing?
Hey, everyone. I'm doing great. So we're going to talk about public finance of campaigns and the problem of government being run by elite interests and really not being accessible to people who are going to run for office and don't have a ton of money or connections to people with a ton of money. And we're really excited to have two people here who have been deep in that work, directly experiencing what it's like to run with public financing and advocating and developing policies to create public funding for campaigns. Welcome, Cindy and Alexa. Thank you for joining us. Really excited to get this conversation going. I'll pass it back to you, Richard.
Let's imagine a future of good living where elections were truly fair and inclusive from the local to federal level. What would it feel like for someone living in that type of future?
It would feel like no one would be thinking about whether or not they could actually raise money and participate in any kind of elections, right? It would feel like a place, a democracy where working folks, poor people, all had access to the possibility of elected office. I think fundamentally that's what it would look like to be.
I echo what Alexa just said. And also, too, I think that everyday people would feel actually represented. There would people be in office that they felt really represented them and not the big moneyed interests like it is right now. I mean, right now, unfortunately, we're in a very much a pay-to-play type system. And I think people would feel represented. They can contact people. Their little donations and support would actually have a meaning and be able to elect people that truly represent them in the world.
You know, it's so funny. There was once a moment in time where I thought about running for city council here in LA. I'm not going to do it because I do not want this administration scrutiny on me and my family. But low-key, I thought about similarly. I was like, well, if I get elected as a council member, I have power. So what am I going to do with this power? And in my mind, I thought that I was going to say 2 out of 5 days of the week, I was just going to be out in the field talking to people. And I was like, the thought about being a council member, literally having like cafecito with the señoras in the district, I was like, that's the best part of the job. Like, you know, but so I really appreciate it, right? How everyday folks could feel representative. And I think having that pairing alongside with this ability to just be on the ground is important.
You know, I actually feel really lucky to live in a city where we've had local leadership coming from working class backgrounds for several years now, and there's a progressive majority on city council, and it's made a huge difference. I mean, there's more funding for all the programs that the community needs. There are better services. You know, when issues come up like ice raids or a fire at the refinery or whatever it may be, you can trust that the city leaders are actually going to fight for you and are going to speak to it. And they do. They're not afraid to, because their power comes from the people in the community and not the, big money that got them there. So big up to Richmond, California. But let's talk about public campaign financing. How does it work? What is it? What does that policy look like in New York City, Alexa?
Public financing is essentially where, a candidate, let's say, will raise $1, and the city or whatever jurisdiction you're in will then match that with public dollars. And it looks different in different cities. In New York City, the match is for every dollar you raise from a New York City resident, this New York City will give you $8. So that's, of course, those contributions, they will be verified. But, that changes the game for somebody who could only provide $10. That turns into like almost $100. So it really does make people feel like they can have a meaningful impact in an election. But in terms of like the overall program, not only is that matching component there, but there's really a lot of accountability, right? Because these are taxpayer dollars. And so there's a lot of reporting that happens. There are spending limits. So these are not like, campaigns that are going to cost, $1 million. They have spending limits on them, as well as how much you can actually raise at the end of the day. So it really kind of, from a very local perspective, puts kind of a campaign in a reachable form. Whereas maybe as you're going in higher office, like let's say congressional races, congressional races could be $1 million we have to raise, and there is no matching. It is a one-to-one thing, and it really does change the dynamic of who can participate and who you're chasing for donations. So here I'm chasing the abuelitas and the tias in the neighborhood because their $5 is so meaningful. I don't have to worry about chasing very well-heeled individuals who have expectations around their contribution. Which really does make a difference in public matching. And so that's a little bit of how the New York City program works.
Alexa was talking about New York City and New York State have matching programs. There's other types of public funding programs like grant programs. And then there's unique programs like a voucher program like Seattle has. Oakland did vote for a voucher type program, but unfortunately they haven't been able to implement it because of funding issues right now. But Seattle was the first place to create a voucher type program. So every eligible resident in the city of Seattle, 18 or older, legal resident, and that includes green card holders, are eligible for 4 $25 vouchers that they can give to participating candidates of their choice. So they can give all of the vouchers to one person, or they can split it up, and it's for mayor, city council, and city attorney races. So Seattle is unique in that program, but there's been public funding of elections for quite a while. For example, Arizona, Connecticut, New Mexico, and Maine all have grant programs. So these are the money that gets put into that. Their candidates are able to get grants to run their campaign. And then there's several matching programs that Alexa had talked about. And that's like in Florida, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, I mentioned, and others have those type of matching programs where, residents give like $5, and then they get matched up to a certain amount. Sometimes it's 6 times or 8 times, something like that. So there's various different types of programs, but the important thing is that it empowers small donors. And that's the big piece to this. It empowers small donors, and it gives candidates that normally maybe don't have access to deep pockets to be able to run a viable competitive campaign. And that's really what public funding is all about.
In like New York City's program, you can choose to opt into the public financing or not. The vast majority of people choose to opt in. You There's a threshold that you have to meet, and it's like 75 in district donors of any amount within certain limits, and then and $5,000. And once you reach those thresholds, then you can continue with the larger matching program. So, there is an eligibility criteria, but I think it's a reachable one, certainly, and just a ton of reporting. I think the accountability thing is really important because it is public taxpayer dollars, right? That we want to make sure we care for and spend appropriately. And I think the last thing in our program is spending limits. I think I mentioned that earlier, but it is important because it really kind of it regulates a campaign, right? This is not just frivolous spending, but like folks really trying to build a campaign within a particular framework. It can, the challenges certainly can come about, but I think it is a way to try to create a program that is both accessible and is trying to be caring of public dollars as well.
And I'm glad you brought up the point about that it's voluntary. Candidates are not forced into these. And that's why it's upheld court challenges to public funding, is because as long as you make it optional where a candidate can or cannot participate in, it will hold up in court. And people argue that, well, this is, my money is going to a candidate I don't support. Well, it's voluntary, right? And it's across the board. So I think that's a really important piece, because they've had public funding programs have been challenged in court, and they've always been upheld as long as it's a voluntary type program.
I'm curious to talk a little bit about the people in themselves, right? The people who are benefiting from public financing. What are some of the problems in their lives that we're focused on when we're talking about public financing? And why is it there an urgency to have real solutions to the problems that folks are dealing with and that would benefit from public financing in the first place?
I think honestly, it goes back to something Cindy said earlier, right? That representation does matter. So public financing allows a working class person, someone who may be very modest, to be able to become a representative, right? And when you actually understand what it means to live paycheck to paycheck, or you understand what it is to be worried about, childcare, or living, in a world with biases, or what it means to be a tenant, you represent differently. Your sense of urgency is different, and those are all issues, right, that affect everyday people all over the country, right? Housing is such a serious challenge. People can't afford um, to live in dignity, right? And so when you get actual elected officials, I think also Eli mentioned it, right? When you get elected officials that really hold that urgency and have those lived experiences, your representation looks real different. The fight looks real different. Now, the billionaires are not going to be worried about or even understand and comprehend what it means to not be able to afford your rent, right? So that's, I think, fundamentally public financing helps to get at that, and really helps to get representatives that are truly connected to all the issues that people currently struggle with.
Well, what is currently flawed with the system that we have? And I think you started getting to this, council member. Also, that I have fun that I get to say council member Aviles because we share the same last name. And you started talking about this, right? It's just the demographic of those who are currently representing community members. There's such a disconnect and lived experience. in so many different ways. So I wonder, Cindy, I'll go to you if you could talk a little bit about what is currently flawed in the type of representation and sort of voting process that we have, or campaigning process that we have now.
Well, yeah, in most jurisdictions, who oftentimes the candidate that raises the most money is the one who wins, and oftentimes who they're getting money from are wealthy donors, and not necessarily even in their jurisdiction. It could be coming from outside the jurisdiction. Foreign interests are not supposed to donate to elections, but there's ways to get even around that through PACs and secret money and dark money, all of that. So right now, it's really tough for candidates to be able to run a viable campaign if they don't have big donors behind them. And it could be industry, chambers of commerce. It could be associations like in the Seattle area, the Realtor Association has a lot of power in elections. So industry, corporations, billionaires. I mean, we're seeing reports all over the place is how much billionaires have been able to control elections by the amount of money they put into it. So that's our current system, especially in places that don't have a public funding option. And you look on the national level, the money keeps going up every cycle. They're breaking records every cycle with the money that's dumped into elections. Public funding is one of the few things we can do to help balance things out a little bit and be able to empower candidates to run viable campaigns that normally don't have that type of access.
Look at Congress. Congress is filled with millionaires who have never worried about how much insulin costs, millionaires who don't understand public education, like millionaires who don't worry about healthcare costs and losing your home because or not being able to afford anything because you have this like insane medical bill because you had an emergency appendicitis. So like truly, in our national elections and our Congress, there is no public financing. And here is where you see the most egregious form of dark money and pay to play and, PACs, and elections that cost millions, $2, $3, $4 million. Where is most people going to find that amount of money? I think when you look at national, I think we on local levels, you see, we're doing so much better and innovating in different ways, with public financing and the vouchers but we need to continue to push that up across the country because we still have very clear examples of where it's failing and the impacts of that failure people are experiencing on a daily basis.
So y'all kind of broke down the faults with the current system around campaigns, and we like to kind of like step back and like look underneath those policies. What are the values and ideas that are behind them? Because these are all made up institutional rules, right? And they value certain things over others, and are rooted in some ideas like making donations to campaigns is free speech, right? Is one of them. But how do you think about kind of the values and ideas upholding our current system around campaigns and elections?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with, we keep coming back to this, but the people that are giving money to candidates, they do it for a reason, right? It's a return on their investment. They're expecting something out of that candidate when they get into power to do something that benefits them. And that undermines the real values of what representation is supposed to mean, right? When it was decided many years ago about, we're going to have a representative government that represents the people. Well, it's really changed. Well, who's really getting represented in government? It's the people that have access to money, and the people with money know that, and they're able to manipulate and control policy. Right? There's been studies out that show that candidates are most likely to pass bills that their big donors want them, or to squash bills that they don't like, which is really the opposite of what true representation in government is supposed to be about. And we want people to be able to be heard in those issues dealt with in a way. Why can't we have affordable health care? Why can't we have deal with people that don't have enough money to, find a place to live and end up in the streets? I mean, why do we have all those issues, and those issues are growing? It's because the policies have been shifted to benefit the most wealthiest in the country, and corporations and very special interests that have an agenda that's different from what everyday people want.
Cindy hit it totally on the head. I mean, as an elected official, I see this firsthand, uh, where real estate in particular, right? When they lobby against true affordable housing or tenants' rights. Our city is certainly battling it, and uh, we're hoping to pass some incredible, like, progressive legislation, and certainly the special interest REBNY. They have their choice legislators who they invested in, who will do everything in their power to block progress on policies, right? That they are opposed to. So I think, their return on investment is controlling the people who are in the power to change policies that impact everyday people. And this is why we need to democratize. And in fact, we need to decommodify elections. Elections shouldn't be a place of profit. We've got to put the public in the public good part again. And there's just a lot of work to be done there. But we see the outcome of it is corporations, special interests get protected, and they stay status quo and they continue to protect themselves, while kind of the rest of it becomes more and more difficult for us to deal with.
100%. I was laughing a little bit because I'm like, we're so ready to call some other place in some other country corrupt. And it's like, girl, we just legalized it. That's all we did here. It functions just the same. I'm curious to hear a little bit about, as we're talking. I love that you called the council member this idea of decommodifying elections, right? So I'm curious to hear, what are some of the other values that we should sort of be imbuing in a more democratic election process?
When candidates are campaigning, they should be talking to their constituents. And right now, we don't see that. They're out, they're on the phone raising money. They're not out knocking on doors, talking to people. With public funding of election type programs, it encourages candidates to get out there and knock on doors, talk to the people in their neighborhoods. What issues matter to them? What issues are affecting their lives that candidate can support and help with, and help pass legislation that lifts their lives up and not continue to, push it down. And so that's one really strong thing I love about public financing of campaigns, is that it forces candidates to actually talk to their constituents face to face, and not be, dialing for dollars all the time.
I would say, you know, the demos of democracy is people. And, the getting back to that value of centering people, empowering the people, not a person or a corporation or the 1%, right? The value of fairness, for all people, the value of representation, to me are there. It's we're talking about shifting a system, but we're also talking about a culture of practice and what we as a country and our democracy value. Unfortunately, has been perverted beyond recognition. But to get back to, like, those values of fairness and representation, and the focus of the people and their wellness, is to me the shifts and values that need to come back, that I think we're all working really hard um, to espouse and figure out ways to change the system, but also in our vernacular and how we talk about it and how we engage with the tias, um, through coffee, because that's exactly right. That is what democracy and representatives should be doing. How you meet people where they are. So that's why all these ways are so important. But those are the values I think we're fighting to get to insert and in some ways get back to.
Let's talk about some of the impact of the where these policies have passed. New York, Seattle, just so happens both elected progressive mayors this last election. Um, Not just because of this law, but why don't Councilmember Aviles, can you tell us about like what was your experience running with the public finance program in New York City, and what other kind of effects have you noticed of that policy?
I think very much of what we've been talking about is, being able to see everyday people engage, right? Running elections, running campaigns can be financial hardships. In addition to, most of us don't know how the hell you even run a campaign. Like, what do you do? Uh, you know, in addition to, like, what they say for women, they have to be asked like 10 times before they actually commit to running a campaign. There's a lot of barriers. But through a public financing system, right? If it's something that I didn't, for a city council race, because of public financing, I didn't have to raise $1 million or $250,000. All I had to raise was like $20,000. Now, even for some people, that feels like an insurmountable, number. But I was like, okay, we can try that. That feels like we can make an earnest try and reach it. And in fact, community members were so excited to be able to participate and see that their $20 turned into $100, and 20 of y'all could do that, and we're at 1,000. Really kind of energized local folks to participate. And so, I think it really does make it accessible, to residents. And you see that because, many in our elections and local elections, you see quite a number of folks coming out. Those folks who are not serious often don't meet the very bare minimum threshold, but you do see people who are interested. And certainly I think that is valuable. And so we in city council, most diverse city council we've ever had in the history of New York City, the first majority women-led council in the history of New York City. I think public financing certainly contributed to that. It certainly contributed to our mayor-elect, who folks say he ran a brilliant campaign. 100% that is true. But part of that equation was public financing that allowed him to run the brilliant campaign, that allowed a ground operation and communications to reach people in various communities in multiple languages. All public financing contributed to these elections and these results in New York City, which we are very, excited about.
That's really, yeah, that's exciting to hear about. What about in Seattle, Cindy? What have you noticed about the impact there?
What's interesting about Seattle's program, it's the most studied public financing program because it's unique with the voucher type program. So there's been 2 books written about it. There's been ongoing reports. We're still waiting for the report to come out for 2025. That'll come out early next year, hopefully. But what we've seen over time is that before the program, around 1% or less donated to Seattle elections. And most of those people that did had water views, which tells you something, right? They're the more affluent people in the city to donate. And then after the program, it has grown, and it depends on the election, somewhere between 5 and 10-fold since then. So we see a lot more lower income people, people of color, young people being able to donate to elections that have never been able to do that before, which means there's a lot more participation. We've also seen that it's increased voter turnout. about 5%. That's what some of the studies show. And then also, too, if you do use your vouchers, you're more likely to vote in the election, but not just the election that you donated, but also future elections. So it gets people to be able to want to continue to participate because it seems like their candidates, because of public funding, are able to run viable campaigns and get elected. And we've seen that also grow in the fact that who can actually run in an election. We've seen a lot more women, people of color, running and winning their seats. So those are all the things that we've seen with the public funding of a program. Also, the program needs to be renewed every 10 years. It's funded by a small property tax. And this was the year we needed to renew it because it was 10 years since it was voted in back in 2015. And we passed with over 59% of the vote. So it's very popular with people to be able to do that. We've also seen decrease in the average donation go down considerably because of the voucher program in Seattle. So there's a lot more stats I could get into, but that gives you kind of an overall view of what the program has done for elections and people to be able to run viable campaigns and actually win.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm curious, what would it look like for public financing to be used to its fullest potential? What additional sort of policies would be needed to complement it? I'm curious, just to throw it out there, Cindy. Like, do you think that a renewal after 10 years, because technically, I mean, 10 years will give you what, like maybe 5 elections?
Yeah, most of Seattle's elections are in the odd year, though we do have some special elections here and there and even years. So yeah, about 5 election cycles overall. We'd really like to see this expanded on a statewide level for state legislative races, also executive type races like governor and auditor and Secretary of State and positions like that. We'd love to see it expand. We'd also like it to expand more in other local jurisdictions and cities and counties across the state. So we're not stopping with Seattle. We're really looking to expand it to other places. And ideally, um, if we could be able to deal with PAC money in some way and independent expenditure money, I think that would be a fabulous reform. Unfortunately, with the Citizens United decision in 2010 and other decisions, and we're waiting another one that is coming up about coordination for campaigns that's in the Supreme Court right now, is if we could deal with that kind of money and then had public funding, we'd have a much more balanced system. And we know that the vast majority of people in this country want to address money in elections. Regardless of what your party affiliation is, most people agree the money is out of control and we need to deal with it. Unfortunately, because of Citizens United, public funding is one of the things we can do, disclosures another thing. But we really need to deal with the PAC money and the independent expenditure money and this unlimited amount of money that can get dumped into elections, especially on the federal level. It's really ridiculous. But it's having an impact even on small races that normally a race that would cost maybe about $10,000 to run. Now we're seeing millions of dollars getting dumped into those races. It's ridiculous that. So we really need to address that that overwhelming amount of money that's getting poured in through PACs, super PACs, dark money, that independent expenditure stuff that we're seeing.
Yeah, here on the independent expenditure situation, which, I think, I don't know, that is essentially, individuals, corporations can dump money outside of the system and they can just do what they want with it, right? It's totally unregulated. So in my last race, I had, I don't know, like probably like half a mil dumped into a local race. from special interests from real estate lobby who's really upset that we're fighting for tenants' rights here. Also from a bunch of other special interests, from the biggest corporations in New York City, Madison Square Garden and Airbnb, to weigh in on local issues. So it really is a huge problem and can make a big difference, with local races as well as with state and national races. So I think definitely agree 100% the independent expenditures needs to be reined in, the dark money packs, um, even something as simple as disclosures. I don't know if disclosures are required across the country. In New York City, they are, but they're teeny tiny. And I would tell my residents, look at who's sending you this real nasty. Apparently, I bring back prostitution, and I'm a what was it? I singularly raised the crime rate in New York City 76%, according to these pack mailers, right? And the disclosure is really important so people understand who is behind these kinds of, vitriol, hate-filled mailers, mythologies that create actual confrontation and violence in communities. So there's a lot of work, but I 100% agree with all the areas that Cindy highlighted that are important to rein in.
Yeah, disclosure is another one of those things that have been held up in the courts. So jurisdictions can pass disclosure laws. In Washington state, we've been able to pass really strong disclosure laws, and we have the Public Disclosure Commission. So you can easily look up a candidate and see exactly where all that money is coming in. And it's easy for reporters to put that money or find that money and put it out there. So that is really something we can do. So public funding, disclosure, two strong reforms we can do to help address money in elections. Ultimately, we'd love to see Citizens United overturned, but we're not there yet, and we won't be there anytime soon.
I'm like, no, Cindy, we can do it. We can do it. We can overturn that. I know. For more information, no.
I did hear that some organizers in Montana have a plan.
Yeah, the Montana plan. Actually, we're looking at doing that in Washington state, and actually New York. I just heard a legislature introduce the bill at the state level there, and what it would do is for states, and this is something interesting because it will definitely be dragged through the courts, but because states control corporate and business charters and other types of entities, they can say, hey, you can't donate to elections. And that's what the Montana plan is about. It's about giving the states the power to regulate corporate interests on all levels, to be able to restrict them from donating to campaigns. So we're watching the Montana plan very closely. And we're also in conversation in Washington state. And I know other places around the country are looking at that one as well to see if that might be a viable option.
Funny enough, I'm going to segue as into our next question because now we're talking more strategy, and the question is like, what are sort of the strategy or organizing strategy to make public financing policies a reality in other cities and other states? And because I'm curious now to hear as we're talking a little bit about the Montana plan, something to look to continue to watch for sure as the folks continue organizing. My only concern as we're talking about it, I'm like, how long? Because I don't think with this Supreme Court, yeah, okay. So I take it back, Cindy. I get it. I see. I was trying to be optimistic, and then I was like, oh wait, yeah, not in this court. My concern is at what point would the courts then intervene if more states start organizing to try to go against Citizens United? But that's another conversation and topic. But I'm curious to hear again organizing strategies to make public financing policies realities for those who are listening.
I think there's a lot of ways you can do that. I think there's a couple of big hurdles to public funding that we need to be more creative about. One is, how do you finance the program? Connecticut uses abandoned properties to fund their program. Seattle uses a small property tax. So we don't like taxes because it tends to really, impact lower income people more than ever. Though luckily the property tax is a little bit more equitable. But we need to find ways to be able to fund the program and really make it a priority. I don't think legislators, because of budgetary issues, make this a priority. So we have to find some creative ways to do it. It could be fines and fees, lobbying fees. There could be a lot of different ways to do that. So I think that's one big hurdle. The other hurdle is administration. Who administers the program? In Seattle, we have the Seattle Ethics and Elections Commission that was already in place when Seattle adopted the public funding program. So we had something there, but some jurisdictions don't have anything like that. So we'd have to create an entity to be able to oversee the program, administer the program, making sure that people are following the rules, be able to, address issues of people misappropriating funds and things like that. So those things really need to happen and be in place. The other thing is building coalition. I think it's really important because there's a lot of different groups out there that focus on different issues, like it could be climate and environmental issues, healthcare, housing, all of those things. But joining together with groups like ours, which is a good government electoral reform group, with other organizations that care about things like the environment and healthcare, to realize that, hey, we all need to work together here in order to change the system, because money impacts your issue just as much as it impacts that other group's issue. And realize that if we don't all come together to address the money issue in politics, none of us are going to get the issues resolved or find solutions. And so I think those are really important strategies in creating more public funding of campaigns, but also doing other type of reforms that can help improve government.
That's really good. I mean, I think, organizing gets the goods. We have to make sure that our communities continue to we raise awareness, I mean, around these issues. And I know we, particularly for communities of color who have been left out of, the political arena, and who have very well placed skepticism, right? For a government who has never wanted to really represent them and is representing the interests of the 1%. That's a real skepticism that is placed in real for good reason. But being able to bring our communities along, right, and break some of this down, that this is a structural, this was baked in, but we can break this down and we can create a democracy where we are all truly represented, is part of the organizing work. So we may not be able to win the Supreme Court now, but now's the time where we continue to organize, build in coalition, because this does, to Cindy's point, affect anything you care about intersects with democracy and who governs this country and who sets the policies. And where we can interject justice and fairness and real representation there, it's going to raise all boats. And so it's not sexy and it might be a little wonky, but in the end, it's our unifying place, for us to, continue, well, to thrive, for our people to thrive. We're going to need to get a hold of this democracy and really make it the multiracial representative democracy that we want it to be. I'm not sure the founding fathers wanted it to be like that, but we want it to be that. That's for sure. So,
But like we say in Spanish, los muertos al hoyo, los vivos al gozo, which translates to the dead in the hole and the living are living.
I think making wonky sexy again should be the tagline for our podcast series. We're trying our best.
we're bringing sexy back.
Bringing wonky back to sexy. So for folks who want to learn more and get involved in the work to advance public finance of campaigns, what resources or organizations can you point people to learn more?
Well, there's a lot of local organizations and statewide organizations working on trying to get public funding of elections. I would research what's happening in your state. groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters, Public Citizen. Those are some national groups that support public funding of election. But there's also those small groups, like in Washington State, we created a coalition of local organizations, People Powered Elections Washington. So we're a group of groups that work on public funding of elections, and it includes, we're a multiracial, multi-generational coalition that really bring together a lot of different groups. So I think you need to find who's doing the work in your jurisdiction, in your state, locally, nationally, on a state level, wherever it might be where you want to get involved. There's a lot of groups very interested in this. I also want to give a shout out to Campaign Legal Center, who does a lot of advocacy work, and they've really helped us write legislation and give us kind of that legal technical support that we need. And so I just really want to give a shout out to them. They've been super helpful for us in helping develop a statewide program and helping write legislation. And also looking over things. So like, what do you think of this idea? Is this legal? Will this hold up in court? And they are very helpful in that. So groups like that have been super helpful with smaller organizations and coalitions that are working on this. But there's a lot of groups out there working on it right now. You just need to contact them and say, hey, are you doing anything on public funding of elections in our state or in our jurisdiction? And if they don't know, oftentimes they'll know who is.
Thanks, Cindy. Alexa, any?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, reach out to Cindy. And no, for New York City, I totally agree. I think every state and city potentially has a constellation of organizations, certainly democracy organizations. For New York City, New York City Public Financing Board, you Google it, you can like geek out on all the kind of how the program is set up and the infrastructure. And it's been around for a really long time, but I think certainly some of the groups, Common Cause is one, and really the democracy oriented groups. But I think again, here's a place where even issue based organ groups can really kind of find common themes and common urgency in their work together on building campaigns.
I love that you called it common urgency. I think, what did Christina call it in our wealth tax episode? Our common denominator of oppression or something. But this notion, right? I think what's been cool in seeing all of the after recording and multiple episodes at this point, the coalition building is really one of the key strategies that comes up. And I think, again, like we also say in Spanish, con dinero baila el mono, which translates to like the monkey dances with money. So to that point, right, that money is attached to so much of the way that we do the work that we do, and try to advance very issue specific things. So I agree that definitely having coalition building is essential to the strategy. We are unfortunately coming to the end of the episode very quickly, which is always surprising to me. And I'm like, how? We had such a great time. So one of the last questions that we have is, if you could rewrite the way that people are taught about campaign financing, where would you start?
First of all, I think we'd want people to care about it and learn about it and know what's going on. How does money impact our system? How can we address that money that is coming in? How do we put some limits on things? I mean, there's some creative strategies out there. We mentioned the Montana plan. I know Maine has also have a case in court about limiting $5,000 for independent expenditures. I mean, there's some creative ways to do it. We shouldn't be afraid to try these things, even if it might get a court challenge, because sometimes bringing it up and having a court challenge can raise awareness and get publicity out about the issue and galvanize more people behind it to be able to address it. So there's no one answer, but we want people to be educated and understand about this and know that everyday people, you do have a say, you do have power. And the more we come together, the more we'll realize that we can actually address these issues on a major level. but we need to realize we do have power. And I think educating people about that is very, very important for any kind of change.
Cindy is fired up. I
Word.
love it. Yes,
Cindy
I
just
feel
dropped the mic. No, that's amazing. I would say first we need to teach it. Unfortunately, I will say, like our education system does a very poor job at just civic engagement. What does it mean? And really espousing the beauty of the responsibility of civic engagement for us all in a system by and for the people, and really pushing those values, and that should start at a very young age, right? Because it's not just one way or another, and it's a constant engagement. It's not just one vote. It's all these different ways we engage, like name it, claim it, and celebrate it. In some places we have universal voting, or it's like the days off. Everyone's duty is to do the vote. So I think we've got to really reframe and claim it in the ways that we should. So really just engaging in awareness building and really claiming it and investing. We must invest in our electoral system to make it a coherent, accessible system across the country. It can't be pay to play. It can't be justice by zip code. It can't be, only certain people of a certain language can access democracy and representation. So I think that's all part of how I would kind of begin to fix the system, or where'd I start?
Yes, now you're dropping the mic. Thank you all so much. I mean, I feel like I got a huge education today on this, and just inspired the reclaiming our government. I like to say government is what makes things easy and free, but which things and for who is always the question. And right now, too much of our government is making things free and easy for just a select few. So to me, this is really about like, how do we put forward strategies to make government really make things free and easy for the rest of us?
100%. I feel like every time, I know, and this is being recorded on a Friday, everybody. So just so you know, when you hear this, you may be listening to this on a Monday, but now they got me fired up on a Friday. I feel like after this, I'm gonna walk out and be like, who do I need to punch? Like, I'm at a point where it's like, listen, I don't condone violence, but with that being said, in our last question, I really love what you said, Councilmember Avilés, about the beautiful responsibility. I think that was something really nice, because I think they're part of the value also, in my opinion, has been the individualism, right? There is no interdependence to a government, to a society. We've been taught that there doesn't need to be, right? It's very laissez-faire of it all. But there is a way for interdependence, like you framed it, the beautiful responsibility that we have to maintain a government by and for the people. That, if it's not a quote already, council member, it should be. You should, we'll take that snippet and run with it. That was beautifully said. In our last question, in 1 minute or less, what is a major takeaway that you would want the listeners to walk away from this episode?
I think for me is just realize that we can change the system. We can make it better. And it goes back to what I said earlier about people having power. I think it really matters that we have to recognize that all of us have something to offer, and we can contribute in a way and really make a difference in the world. So that's what I would end with.
I would say, we can have representative government by and for the people, but we're gonna have to take it, y'all. We're gonna have to activate and do the work, um, and accept nothing less. And that's gonna take all of us to do that. But we can have it if we want it.
Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful.
And thank you all to all our listeners for joining into another episode of the Real Solutions podcast. I hope that you have been inspired, fired up, and y'all better want this, because, we're out here organizing. So if you want it, we can have it for sure. Thank you all so much.